Buenas tardes, good afternoon. So we're going to start this session. So we are delighted to have Paul Geltzer today at the La Cea Lames conference in Lima, Peru. He is the Sheen Professor of Economics at the University of California, Berkeley, where he holds appointments at the Haas School of Business and the School of Public Health. He's the Faculty Director of the Institute for Business and Social Impact, and he's also the Scientific Director of the Center for Effective Global Action. I can list all his CV, but you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from him. So I don't think he needs introduction, but as I say, it will take a while to list all his impressive publications and contributions to impact evaluations of social programs. Personally, when we train public officials in Canada, we use your textbook, which is great, it's absolutely great. So without further ado, please welcome Paul Geltzer.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, first of all, thank you to Pablo and the organizing committee for inviting me to be here today. What I'm going to talk about today is really state capacity, the ability of the public sector to efficiently do its job. And this is joint with my Chilean mafia, Pablo Selje, Marcelo Olivares, and Raimundo Undaraga, and as usual, all the mistakes are theirs. I think Raimundo is here, and so you can complain to him. And so this paper is called Monitoring Organizational Culture and Procurement Efficiency. And I think there are going to be a bunch of lessons here about how technology can really improve procurement and how the organizational culture, really the relationships and the common values between managers and workers, in this case buyers or procurement officers, really affects not only the performance of the organization, but leverages how interventions like monitoring might work in unexpected ways. So this is an unusual paper for me because we actually wrote down a model, and then the model yields some things that we didn't expect, and we test those in the data, and they turn out to be true. Okay, so we're working in the public sector, and most of you in this room will be shocked to hear that efficiency is really not a first-order priority in public services, especially in procurement. And there's been a long discussion of this in the economics literature. So Lafont and Tirole write, since they buy goods and services with other people's money, moral hazard problems are everywhere. Bandiera writes, buyers may have strong preferences for leisure and put little effort into getting value for money. Benabou focuses on wishful thinking and willful blindness that easily spread through organizations, reinforcing the belief that efficiency doesn't matter. But a lot of us study this. There's a long long literature on procurement, because efficiency is a valuable source of budgetary savings for organizations, especially under tight resource constraints. And so rather than getting more money, maybe we can be more efficient. Okay. So one approach to improving the efficiency of procurement is really to monitor buyer purchaser performance. Are you getting the best price possible, the lowest price possible? Are you putting in enough effort? Do you have the information available? And so if you can measure performance, you can provide that information to the buyers themselves, and that may incentivize those that are intrinsically motivated to correct mistakes and put in more effort to have better practices. Managers might use that information to retrain those who aren't performing well for salary and promotion, or to reward and punish efficient or inefficient behavior. And then if buyers themselves know they're being monitored, they themselves might put in more effort, even if they're just intrinsically motivated and not intrinsically motivated. But monitoring performance really has not taken off in a big way in the procurement industry, and there's been a long discussion of this as well. Monitoring is very, very expensive and may actually increase bureaucracy and increase costs. So if you're going to go ahead and monitor, then you have to find what a better price was than what the buyer paid. And that requires doing a lot of search and spending a lot of time trying to figure that out. And so monitoring itself, which is primarily done through auditing, turns out to be expensive. You can only do it on a small sample, and so most agencies don't do comprehensive monitoring. And then there are also concerns that monitoring itself might conflict with civil service laws. So we haven't seen it really expand in a big way. What we're going to do in this paper and this work is look at technological innovations in the Chilean procurement system that allow cheap and easy monitoring. And you can do it on 100% or almost 100% of purchases. So it's not just a small sample, but you can provide information on performance widely within the system in an ongoing basis. So, so what happened in Chile, really starting about 2003, but has continued to evolve, is the creation of a centrally regulated Amazon-like e-commerce platform from which the purchasing agents or the buyers can choose among quite easily. So I got to buy pencils for my school. I get online like I would do in Amazon. I choose the particular pencil I got, and transaction costs for me are really, really low. So, but what they do is they combine this with what they call framework agreements. And these framework agreements identify broad categories of products, and then they run competitions for which firms and which products are going to be put on the Amazon platform. So they use this pre-selection competition to identify the set of products, prices, and quality that are available, that are on this e-commerce platform. And this competition does a number of things. One is it gets them to put low prices on. Second, it also has minimum quality standards. So you're not going to get on the platform if you put pencils that fall apart. Okay. And so buyers order from this pre-approved list. About half of all purchases go through this platform, so it's big. And we're going to exploit that for monitoring. Okay, so how does monitoring work? Well, I now have this electronic purchasing platform, and I can in real time know what price you're paying, how many units you're looking at, and I can see if you could have gotten a cheaper alternative on the platform. So there still could be dozens of alternatives you would have to look through, and they have small differences. But what we're going to do is we're going to basically use machine learning algorithms to identify the set of products available on the platform that have the same attributes as the one you want. So if I'm a hospital and I'm buying pens for doctors, well, I'm going to have pens that are fine line and medium line and long and short, felt tip, and things like that that I could choose from. And so we can identify relatively easy, based on attributes, cheaper alternatives of approximately the same quality. And so together with Chile's budget office, DPRES, and their procurement office, Chile Compra, we use these data to develop monthly reports about the purchasing performance of every buying agent. And then we sent those reports to the buyer and to the manager. And so we had information regularly going into the system about individual buyer performance. Okay. And so the first piece of this is we're going to have two types of treatment. We're going to do a field experiment. One is we're going to have a public treatment where I get the buying behavior, how much Chico is overspending in the last month, and I provide Chico a report on how he's doing relative to the other people, and then I provide that information to Chico's boss, and Chico knows I'm providing it to the boss. So this is not only performance information, this is performance information made public to the decision makers. And then we're going to have a private treatment where we only provide the information on the individual back to the individual buyer, and to the manager we provide information at his unit level. So unit could be made up of 5, 10, 50 buyers, and all the manager is going to know is how well his or her unit is doing relative to other units. And we get out of this, we can, this is a side point. If it's private information and I'm intrinsically motivated, then I might use that to improve the world. But if you're extrinsically motivated, you may have to worry about what your boss thinks, and so it's the public intervention that will matter. Okay. Then the second piece of this looks at the organizational culture within the unit. So we can think of organizational culture between manager and workers, between managers and purchasing agents, as the extent to which the manager and the agents have the same value of the performance of the unit. So do we both really care about efficiency, or I care about efficiency and you don't? And so organizational culture is strong when we have shared values. And those shared values, we're going to write down a model, and it turns out that organizational culture is going to be not only important for the performance of the unit, but it's going to mediate the effectiveness of the information provided. Okay. All right. And the model we write down is going to have a couple things. One is if the buyer and the manager both value efficiency, then I trust you. As a manager, I trust you to do the job. So if Chico and I both value efficiency, then I know Chico's going to do a good job, and I don't have to put a lot of effort into getting him to perform better, and I don't have to monitor as much. And so aligned values lower the need for performance information. On the other hand, if we have misaligned values, Chico's lazy, only wants to watch football and drink beer, or caipirinhas maybe, then I'm going to monitor him. I'm going to provide a lot of effort into making sure he does the job. And at a first level, it's pretty straightforward to say organizations where values are aligned or shared perform better than organizations where values are misaligned. Now we come in and we add to this an external body that's collecting performance information on your workers. So all of a sudden I've got Chili Compra coming and telling me, here is Chico's performance last month. And the question is, how valuable is that information? Well, it turns out that we're going to argue that the effect of that information is much stronger in organizations where values are aligned between the buyer and the manager, and less effective in organizations where they're not aligned, where the buyer values efficiency a lot less. And the reason for that is in the misaligned organizations, I've already put in a lot of effort to monitoring Chico. And so the value of this additional information with diminishing returns is much less. When I have aligned values between manager and buyer, well, this information is new. And if all of a sudden, even though we have shared values, it turns out Chico's underperforming, that information is new to me, something I didn't have. So the model says that you expect information through monitoring to be more effective in shared values than in discordant values. Okay. And so we're going to test that in the data as part of this field experiment as well. Okay. So just in case you want to leave early, here are the results. Overall, we find procurement overspending is a little bit more than 8%. It's non-trivial. It's obviously Chile is a pretty well-functioning purchasing agent, so it's probably low within the region. We find that public monitoring, where I give information on the buyer performance not only back to the buyer, but also the buyer's manager, reduces overspending by about 2 percentage points or a quarter. And then all the gains are from reduction in price per unit. There's nothing on the extensive margin in terms of buying less units or doing fewer purchases. And there's no effect of private information on public spending. So it's only the performance information is also given to the manager. And so we walk away thinking extrinsic motivation is what's driving workers in this sector, not intrinsic motivation. Okay, and that will come back when we talk about policy implications of the stuff we've learned. The other thing we document is the model says if you have divergent values, you have an organizational culture where buyers and managers are not on the same page, then managers will be collecting a lot more performance information on their own. So we look at baseline data and document a strong negative correlation between discordant values and monitoring. And then what we find is, when you look at the effect of the randomized information intervention on overspending, on paying over price, that its biggest effect are in the organizations where they have shared values, and actually zero in organizations where values are very far apart, again, consistent with the model. And so at the end of this, I'm going to basically say organizational culture is important not just for performance, but mediating the effect of all the types of interventions that we'd want to do to improve performance. And it turns out, in this case, to be quite true. All right, so let me spend a little bit of time talking about how Chile Compra works, and then I'll set up the, I don't think I'll go into the details of the model. I'll show you a little bit about how it works, experimental design, and then unusually I'll present sample data, measurement, and results. Okay. All right, so Chile's public procurement system was reformed starting in about 2003. There are 3 main purchasing mechanisms. So one is a traditional auction mechanism. I want to buy some cars. I put a public tender out, I get some bids, and I choose the cars that come in cheapest. This public procurement is designed for very large purchases over about $60,000. It has, you get the lowest price because it's competitively bid. There's no choice involved. And it has very, very high transaction costs because you have to run a public tender for every item you buy. And then there's direct purchases, which are kind of petty cash type purchases, where I'm in a hospital, I need to get some pens. I just go to the local store, I spend $60 on pens, and I don't have to go through anything, those direct purchases. So in this case, it's low transaction fees, and I get what I want, but I need to justify the use of this mechanism. And about half of all the purchases go through one of these two mechanisms. All right. In the procurement literature, there's a long discussion of trade-off between these two types of purchasing mechanisms. The procurement auctions enhance competition and transparency, but they have high transaction costs both in time and designing rules, and direct purchases have low transaction costs. And so what Chile Compra decided to do was try and combine these two mechanisms into a framework agreement. And what the framework says is, here are broad categories of products. What we're going to do is run a public tender for products in this large category. Firms bid to be listed on the website, and they list price, delivery time, and product attributes. And so the bidding does two things. One is it pre-establishes a competitively bid low price. It has minimum quality floors, so you don't get crappy products listed on the site. And so it's meant to be, it's meant to kind of have the best of both worlds. You competitively list products, and then you give choice to the agents to choose from that list. And why is choice important? Well, you're choosing amongst some attributes that might be important. And one example is, I'm at a hospital. I got a bunch of doctors who want to write with a felt tip pen. They don't want to write with a ballpoint pen. And so I really want to choose felt pens, or they want pens that have fine lines versus medium lines, things that really shouldn't matter, but for idiosyncratic reasons, the buyer wants to choose those things. And so the feeling is choice matters, and it's important. And so this two-stage process of competitive process to select the items that are listed, and then buyers choose among them, trades off the competitive process with choice. And about half of the purchases go through this mechanism. Okay. Let's see. And this kind of Amazon-like system lists about 90,000 goods and services. So there are 90,000 options from about 3,000 different suppliers, and then close to 900 state agencies, purchasing units, buy from this platform. Okay, I'm going to skip that. All right, so we have this Chile Compra, which lists competitively bid goods and services. And then the individual agents go out and make decisions. And the concern from the government was those agents aren't going to be working hard to find the lowest cost price. Now, there also may be some corruption involved, but I think that's less of a problem in this procurement system than in others. And so what the government agencies, DPRESS and the purchasing agency wanted to do was design some interventions which might provide incentives to get agents to work harder to find better prices. And so we're exploring the role of monitoring performance to incentivize buyers. All right, so just a little model. I'm just going to give you kind of the setup and how it affects things. And the result that we were surprised at was this more monitoring information is more effective in aligned value organizations than disaligned. So you've got a simple principal agent problem. The agent is trying to decide between doing the same old status quo A or an alternative B. And B has some sort of random payoff value, but the buyer and seller could have different values of the payoff from doing B. And so you have this delta which is the absolute difference between the principal's value of doing B and the agent's value of doing B. And then what happens is the principal exerts effort to make the agent choose the option that they believe in best, and they can get that option with probability, which is a function of effort and the information they have about the agent's performance. And the larger is S, the more information they have, the less effort they have to do to get the agent to do what they want to do. Okay. And then the payoff function, after you do all of the substitution, has this delta. This is the difference between the value of the principal and the agent. It enters negatively. And so when I look at the marginal product of more effort, the more discordant you are, the lower the marginal productivity of effort. And so you have to do more effort to get what you want. So there's more, essentially, individual monitoring in those organizations. And then the same thing's true when I provide more external monitoring information about performance. The effectiveness of that is lower in more discordant organizations. Okay. And so the predictions are, the model is that the monitoring information S on buyer performance decreases manager's effort and increases payoff. In other words, the manager has to exert less effort to convince the buyer to do what she believes is best. More misalignment increases the effort the manager has to do and decreases payoff. And then finally, more external performance information has a lower effect on payoff with more mismanagement because they already have high effort. And there's a diminishing marginal return to effort. So even if you have, because you're already putting in a lot of effort in discordant organizations, if S tells you to add in, if more information tells you to add more effort, the effectiveness of that effort is just lower. Okay. So those are predictions of the model. The experiment. So this is our sophisticated graphic of the organization of Chile Compra. There's a manager in the Ministry of Health, and then within each hospital there's a head of finance, and then in the finance group there are a whole bunch of buyers. Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to randomize at the organization level. So it's a cluster randomized trial, and you're going to either be in a public information treatment where the performance information on all the buyers in that unit is provided both to the buyer and to the managers, to a private information group where the performance information, individual performance information, is only given to the buyer, and the manager gets unit-level performance information, and then a pure control. We start out with about 180 purchasing units with about 7,000 buyers in the experiment, and again, the randomization is at the unit level, not at the buyer level. Okay. Everybody gets a video explaining the efficiency of measures, and it's a cute cartoon with stick figures, so my son would like it. And then each month, a report is generated on your performance and your performance relative to your peers, and your unit's performance relative to other performance. And this is the feedback form. Okay. All right. So that's the intervention. Data is pretty straightforward. From the system itself, the administrative data gives us every transaction. We get the unit ID, the buyer ID, the product code, the unit price, number of units, and total amount spent. Each transaction is registered and uniquely identified, and we observe all of this. Okay, so it makes it relatively easy to use. And we also observe, since we observe all transactions, we know in the week that you made this purchase, what the price was of all other products. And so what we're going to do is construct for every purchase a comparable group of products where we use machine learning to find products with the same attributes. And then we're going to pick the first percentile of that distribution as the lowest price. And then for each product, we'll construct a measure of overprice, which is what you paid minus the reference price divided by the reference price. So these are your 1 if you chose the first percentile price, and your above 1 if you overpaid. Now, you can have some negative values or some values less than 1 if you chose below the first percentile, and we do have a few of those in the data. We didn't want to use the first percentile just for measurement error reasons. Okay. All right. Let's see. And then we were only able to we did this for 3 categories: food, office supplies, and hardware. For hardware, we were able to find enough data for 100% of the transactions. For office supplies, 80%, and food, about 1/3. So this didn't work everywhere, and even within the categories they thought they would work, but they worked for a large number of products. All right. So then we have this for every agent, their average overprice of all transactions, say, in the month prior to us starting the experiment. And these are the distributions of the public treatment group, the private treatment group, and the control treatment group. And not only are the means identical, the distributions just are on top of one another. So we think the randomization worked. Surprise. Okay. All right, so then what we want to do is we want to get some measures of organizational culture, the extent to which the manager and the buyer have the same or different values of efficiency in public procurement. And so we developed some surveys, identical surveys of buyers and managers, and we asked 8 questions about how beneficial is efficiency, how costly is overspending, and we're going to use that to construct a measure for each buyer and manager. Well, I don't have this in here. So essentially, what we do is we take those measures, take the absolute difference, convert those absolute differences to standard deviations, and then average across the 8 units, and then average those across the whole unit. Okay. All right. So here are some results of the experiment. And we're going to look at, let me tell you how this table is organized so you can read it. So each column is a different model. The first 2 rows are dummies for the public treatment arm versus the private treatment arm, and these interpreted both relative to control, and then we got some statistics for each model below. The first one that's worth paying attention to is the control mean, to get an idea of the size of the impact. So the first thing we do is we're going to look at the extension margin, which is what we were worried about was the information treatments might drive people out of Chile Compra. Chico doesn't like to be monitored. The way he can get out of being monitored is he can shift his purchases from the online platform to the other 2 platforms. And so here, there's no effect of either the public-private treatment in terms of the share of purchases that an agent would make on the platform. Now we look at the intensive margin. So of those that were on the platform, what's the effect on overprice? And you see that in the control group, about 8.5%, it's about 8.7 percentage points average over purchase. And if you have the public treatment, that falls by 2.1 percentage points, or about a quarter. And then the private treatment, there's no effect. Okay. So this is the result that I've been touting all along. And then we ask, well, if you're spending all this extra effort searching for better prices, do you stop doing other parts of your job? So do you purchase fewer units? And the answer is no. And then do you process fewer purchase orders? And the answer is no. So there seems to be more effort going into finding a better price without being substituted from other parts of the job. Okay, and so now we want to spend a little bit of time looking at the mechanisms, make sure they line up with those results. And so if the manager is going to take action, or the unit is going to worry about how this information is being used, the question is, what does the budget office know? And do the manager and buyers know that the budget office is monitoring their behavior? So here we have some data from the manager survey. Do you believe that the budget office is monitoring your purchasing behavior? And the treatments increase that quite a bit. And then over here, do you believe that the budget office knows if you're overspending and how much? And again, the treatment increases the belief that the budget office is not only monitoring, but paying attention to overspending. Then we look at actions that the manager and buyer might take. So there are two mechanisms by which this might work. One is, I now have this information, so I'm going to punish or reward buyers depending on their performance, and so I might take a bunch of actions. Or the buyer might say, aha, the manager knows my performance, so I better put more effort in. And so here we've got actions the manager might take. There's no effect on monitoring purchases more. There's no effect on monitoring spending. There's no effect on creating a position to monitor spending. And there's no change in rewards or punishment for overspending. Okay, so those are the manager side. Then on the buyer side, we ran kind of these experiments, and one was we asked them, if you know that DPRESS, the budget office, is monitoring you, what criteria are you most going to pay attention to in terms of making the purchase, price or quality? And the public treatment increases the answer to price. And to us, this is suggestive of the way the information reports work, is the buyer is worried about what their manager might think, and so the buyer puts in more effort. Okay. Now let's turn to organizational culture. And here I'm going to do a couple things. We're going to look at the discordant, the difference between the value of efficiency, how aligned they are versus how discordant they are. We get similar message for the top manager and the user from about 2,700 buyers and managers. Notice that that's about a third. A response rate was about 30%, about 30 to 40% of the potential number of buyers in the study. And then we have this 8-item survey, which from the baseline that we use to construct the value of purchases related to consequences of underspending on next year's budget, DPRESS monitoring, and consequences of inefficient expenditures. Let's see. And so, like, one question would be, next year's budget is largely determined by how much this year's budget is executed. Or if savings are generated, then next year's budget will be reduced. Sometimes in the public services, purchases are made at high prices, to comply with budget execution. So there are 8 questions like this that we use. We construct the absolute difference, we convert those to standard deviations, and then aggregate those for each buyer. Okay. Now these are the distributions of the misalignment in each of the 184 distributions. And again, the distributions pretty much line up are on top of each other. There's no difference in the distributions across public treatment, private treatment, and control. Okay, so the first thing is the model says that if you're in misaligned organizations where Chico and I have very different values of efficiency, I'm going to monitor Chico a lot more. So we took the baseline data, we looked cross-sectionally. The unit of observation here is the purchasing unit, not the buyer. And what we find is that the degree of monitoring goes up by about 9 percentage points in more misaligned organizations. And even if you condition on the unit size, that doesn't change. Okay. This is not experimental, it's just cross-sectional correlation, but it's consistent with the model. And now what we do is again, the dependent variable here is overspending. And the dependent variable here is overspending. And now what we're going to do is we replicate, the first column replicates what we did earlier. And now what we do is we add in, all right, I need a technical adjustment. Here we go, I feel like Richard Nixon. Okay. Okay, thank you. Wow, that's much louder. So now what we do is we add in the public treatment indicator, the private treatment indicator, and then the third row is the degree of misalignment in values, and then misalignment interacted with the public and private treatment. And what you see now in column 2, the first row says the public treatment still was about minus 0.02, 2 percentage points. But that fell the more misaligned the values were in the organization. And if your misalignment is 1, then there's no effect of the public treatment. And so the treatment really only works in organizations where the value of efficiency between workers and buyers is well aligned. Right. And then this is the effect of misalignment on performance. The more misaligned they are, the more overspending goes on in the organization, which again falls out of the model. So, all right. So a couple things kind of fell out of this project for us. One is that Chile's online purchasing system facilitates cheap and easy monitoring. And so it's not just to lower transaction costs of buyers, but we can also figure out whether buyers are overspending and use that information to really improve efficiency. The system relied a lot on these framework agreements with this 2-step process of using competitive bidding to figure out which products go on the platform, and then buyer choice to tailor to specific unit needs within limits. And then we can, with some work, but not in a massively difficult way, identify a set of comparable products based on their attributes using machine learning. This gives us a choice set from which we can find the lowest price and get an idea of how much you're overspending. And that technology can be used for, in this case, about half of the purchases on the platform, which is quite large. And if you compare that to auditing, which can do it for a few % of projects, this is going to be much more efficient and much cheaper. So what makes this work is the technology. And it's certainly worth other countries taking a look at this experience. And then with this technology, we could implement something although our RA says it's more expensive because he wasn't paid to develop the software, but that didn't really increase costs. Then the monitoring reduced overspending if the information was made public. So the overspending information given to the buyer and the manager led to the worker putting in more effort trying to find lower prices, and we think this is driven through extrinsically motivated buyers and not intrinsically motivated buyers, and that's quite important for the design of specific interventions. And then in our case, the intervention over our experiment saved about $750,000 just in our sample. And then if you were to extrapolate to purchases wide, it's about $10 million annually that this type of system can reward. So it's non-trivial in terms of budget savings. Then the other piece of this, which we think is quite important, is the role of organizational culture. Again, organizational culture is the degree to which managers and buyers share the same value of the performance of the organization or unit, in this case, efficiency. And we found that organizational culture, better organizational culture, not only improved performance, but it also improved the use of monitoring information to increase efficiency. And so shared values, the organizational culture, is really important, because without good organizational culture, a lot of the types of interventions that we might push are not really going to be effective. And so what that says to us is there might be some value in thinking of interventions that educate or try and align or recruit buyers and workers who are a bit mission-oriented for the organization. You're still going to pay them, but they're mission-oriented. Or you could imagine interventions which say, here are the value of what we're doing and why it's good for the country and why you could care and things like that. And actually, there's a nice PhD thesis at you'll be shocked to hear, Berkeley, which tries this out in Pakistan and finds some effectiveness that these types of interventions can improve mission value. So that's what we did on our summer vacation, and thank you for paying attention on the last day, in the afternoon of the last day of the conference. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So we have about 10 minutes for questions, if you can raise your hands.
Thank you, Professor Gutler, for this wonderful presentation. I'm interested to know your view about the effects that you get, because you got like around 2 percentage points of something that is already like 8% of like overpricing. So do you see this, if we wanted to do something similar in other countries or in other regions, do you think that the intervention would bring a 2 percentage point reduction or a 25% reduction?
Well, 2% is 25% of the overspending, right?
Yeah.
So one's 2 percentage points. So I think there are a number of issues in other countries. One is the level of corruption might be much higher. I think in Chile, we're really looking at more about effort than corruption. In fact, one of the things that the platform, the technology does is it makes it very hard to do self-dealing, which is, you know, I have a competition, you're my friend, you bid, and I just give it to you. That's much harder to do in this platform. You know, I don't know what the if I knew how these things scaled to other countries, if I knew how anything scaled, I'd be up there in the Nobel Prize list. But I just think scaling is really, really hard. And you know, like I've got some work which worked really well in Jamaica, and then Horacio goes and shows it doesn't work in other countries, and now I'm pushing something, and Horacio correctly points out, yeah, it works in a sample of 100, but not in a sample of 5,000, or it doesn't work as effectively. So, I don't know. The good news is we're having conversations with Paraguay and Ecuador about potentially trying something there. And we got guys like the chief economist for Latin America at the World Bank, Bill Maloney, in the office, in the audience, and other people. And we're going to try and push them to talk to other countries to see if we could explore what's going on. So that's a long non-answer to your question, but it's a good question.
Can I ask another one? Is that okay? Okay, since I started, it's just like a quick one. So within your sample, you have different industries, and some of them probably have like higher overpricing than others.
Right.
So do you have any suggestive evidence that the effects are similar in all of those different types of goods, or maybe you don't have power, so I don't know.
Well, we haven't, we haven't gotten that far, so it's a good question, and I think it's on the long list of things to do. Ernesto.
You basically answer my question. I was going to ask about corruption, because you mainly talk about effort.
Where are you from?
That was a follow-up, that perhaps in Chile, which is, as we all know, a European country, OECD level, that's not a concern, but in most of the region, we will be talking more about corruption than about effort provision.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and your work with Rafael is point on to that stuff. So, we'd love to start working in other countries to tackle that problem and see if things scale where corruption is more of the issue than effort. We just don't know. Juan Pablo.
Thanks, Paul. So you focus a lot on misalignment of incentives, but you didn't talk much about how the buyers are paid. And maybe the easiest way to solve this is to basically provide them with high-powered incentives to save money. So I wanted to hear your thoughts of...
Well, there are two things. Is Raimundo here? So he could answer this. But I think they're salaried, so there's no commission or penalty. So this is an issue with using performance incentives in bureaucracy. It's against many civil service laws, so you need a legal action to be able to do this. In fact, we first started out with, when we found poor performance or good performance, why don't we give them a bonus? And that turned out not to be allowed under Chilean civil service law.
If I got you right, you were looking in the procurement offices, but did you have a look at the institution where these procurement offices were? Because maybe they're saving money here, but they spend it, in a different project, for example, and then the savings is not really happening.
Yeah, it's possible, but we're looking at a sample of purchasing units, and they don't, they have separate budgets and separate objectives. And so at least within the purchasing units we were looking at, that wasn't happen. What the government did with that savings, I don't know, which is, I think, where you're going.
I think there is one question, maybe. So we have time for one more.
Thank you. Am I right to think that you're assuming the manager is just wanting to do the best in this situation? So you assume the manager is kind of out of the game in a sense, but it might not be, right? I mean, it could be that the manager also has a different agenda, and then it kind of complicates the model.
Yeah, it's why we look at the difference in values. And so the way we set it up, which is probably not correct, both of you could have low value, but the fact you're aligned is what works. The manager could have low value and the buyer could have high value, and that's still misalignment. But we haven't gotten in, we're worried about what your what you're suggesting. We just haven't figured out how to do it in a powered way.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today, and let's give another round of applause.